A few encounters are brief, yet they leave an indelible impression on our minds. Occasionally it commences with an ordinary event. A minor incident, a heatwave, and a quiet text from my spouse. Next, everything undergoes an instantaneous transformation. I was unaware of this when I awoke that morning. It was an ordinary day in Phoenix, Arizona. It was simply scorchingly hot. The air was so dense that my epidermis felt as though it were affixed to the sheets. I reached for my phone, and the screen illuminated with a text message from Mark that I recognized. "I will be working until late, so please do not delay until dinner." The phrase was so repetitive that I was unable to respond any longer. I sighed, rose from my bed, and proceeded to prepare coffee. The small kitchen was filled with the aroma of coffee, but it did not alleviate the sense of desolation that I was experiencing. I then observed the silence. The ceiling fan's familiar murmur was absent. The air in the room was dense, and beads of perspiration gradually cascaded down my temples. I raised my head and observed it standing still as if it were taunting me in the desert heat. I exhaled. This apartment would function as a furnace in its absence. I retrieved the phone and began to navigate the screen with my finger, in pursuit of a repair service that was in close proximity. A name appeared. Positive evaluations and prompt responses. However, I did not give it much consideration. I simply made the call. A deep, pleasant male voice responded, "Hello, I am Jake. I am available to visit this afternoon." It was a straightforward telephone communication. A minor issue in my uninteresting marital existence. A repairman is scheduled to arrive to complete his duties. There is nothing noteworthy. However, I was mistaken. Little did I realize that the instant I opened the door, I would not only welcome a stranger into my home, but also a tidal wave of emotions that I had never anticipated. The afternoon arrived more rapidly than I had anticipated. My apartment was transformed into a slow-burning steamer as a result of the unremitting heat that seeped through the glass windows. I stood in the kitchen, my palms sweating as I gazed at the icy water in my glass, which was slowly melting. Subsequently, the doorbell tolled. For some unknown cause, my heart plummeted. I walked to the door, adjusted my loose t-shirt, and ran a hand through my hair. There, Jake stood. He was younger than I had anticipated. He may have been in his early 20s, and his light brown hair was tousled. He had the tan of an individual who had labored outdoors. However, it was his irises that immediately captured my attention rather than his physical appearance. A quiet yet piercing blue, as if they could see straight through anyone. He smiled briefly, but it was a warm smile. "Greetings, I am Jake. I am present to repair the fan." His voice was low and composed, devoid of any urgency, as if the oppressive heat outside did not disturb him in the slightest. "I suppose you are my salvation today." I smiled and stepped aside to allow Jake to enter. He gazed around the apartment, his eyes absorbing every detail. His manner of observation was peculiar to me. It is not out of curiosity, but rather to keep in mind. I directed him to the living room, stating that the fan was present. Jake raised his head, nodded slightly, and deposited his tool bag. It appears that one of the blades is loose, which is likely due to ancient vibrations. "Please permit me to examine the matter more closely." I sat down in the chair, with my arms folded across my chest, and observed. Each movement was precise and decisive as Jake worked with skill. He was not merely a repairman. Rather, he possessed an almost magnetic focus, as if the world had ceased to function. I was unable to recall the last time I had gazed at someone with such intensity. The sunlight streaming through the windows accentuated the strong lines of Jake's body as he stretched, his arms reaching for the ceiling and beading perspiration down his forehead. I immediately turned my gaze away, attempting to disregard the fleeting thought that had crossed my mind. I rose from my seat, entered the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of iced water. It is possible that I required an object to divert my attention from Jake. Upon my return, I positioned the glass on the adjacent table. I advised him to consume water, maintaining a composed tone of voice. Jake was smiling as he glanced down and then up. I am grateful. For a brief moment, his gaze captivated mine considerably longer than it ought to have. A distinct heat surged through me, distinct from the air that enveloped me. As Jake continued to operate, we initiated conversation. He discussed his occupation, including his apprenticeship and his first foray into self-employment. Something about Jake elicited a sense of tranquility in me. His sincerity, or it could have been the manner in which he was not hurried, nor was he superficial as opposed to numerous individuals I had encountered. It had been a considerable amount of time since I had engaged in a conversation of this nature. An hour passed by in a flash. Jake gazed at me, wiped his hands on a towel, and said, "It's all right. The fan has resumed operation. You will no longer be bothered by it." I exhaled a murmur of relief, but I also experienced a sense of disorientation, a sentiment that was exceedingly difficult to comprehend. I expressed my gratitude by standing up. Jake gathered his tools and exited the building. I unconsciously tightened my grasp on the glass of water in my hand as he placed his hand on the doorknob, as if to extend the moment. Then I merely stated, "I will contact you if there is any issue." Jake's smile persisted as he turned around. At any given moment, following his departure, I was left alone in the tranquil apartment. I gazed upward, observing the ceiling fan rotate steadily. The room progressively filled with cool air, but I did not experience any sense of relief. A recent event had occurred, something that I was unable to identify. My eyes were still fixed on the ceiling fan that was running smoothly as I sat on the settee that evening. However, my thoughts were elsewhere. An ordinary fan repairman. A straightforward encounter. A period that is fleeting. Nothing more. However, what was the reason for my unease? The following morning, I was awoken by an unusual sensation. Nothing specific, rather a silent sense of unease. Something that had been with me since last night. I entered the living room, where the sheer draperies allowed the early morning sunlight to filter in. Except for the gentle murmur of the ceiling fan, the apartment was devoid of noise. Taking a deep breath, I reminded myself that the incident that occurred yesterday was of a minor nature. A repairman arrived, completed his duties, and departed. The narrative concludes. However, a peculiar noise emanated from the sofa as I approached it. Crack, crack, crack. I raised my head. The ceiling fan continued to rotate, however, there was an issue. It produced a slight murmur with each rotation, as if there were an internal component that was loose. I was overwhelmed by a sudden surge of apprehension. Jake had repaired it, as I had observed. He had exercised such caution that it was impossible for the devotee to experience any further complications. I hesitated. Should I return the call? A portion of me desired to disregard it. It was merely a minor disturbance. However, my hand was already reaching for the phone before I had the opportunity to consider the situation. Dialing the number was my action. The buzzer sounded, and a voice that was both familiar and resonant said, "Hello, this is Jake." I inhaled. I believe it is a pleasant morning. The fan is not yet functioning properly. It is emitting an unusual sound. Is it possible for you to visit? Once more? A brief delay occurred. I was abruptly apprehensive that he might be bothered. Nevertheless, Jake's voice reemerged, smooth and assured. "There is no issue. I will arrive at the location in approximately 1 hour." I could not deny that I was pleased about this. I felt as though a part of me had been anticipating this moment for some time when the doorbell sounded. I unzipped. A door. Jake was present. An expression that is perpetually composed. The same serene yet penetrating gaze. That was swift. I made a jest, stepping aside to allow him to enter. Jake shrugged. "I do not wish for you to endure this heat for an extended period." I did not maintain my distance this time. I approached Jake as he bent down to inspect the fan, and I detected a faint, woody odor emanating from his person. a robust, masculine fragrance that was entirely inappropriate for a typical morning. I assured myself that it was merely a figment of my imagination. A screwdriver was extracted from the toolbox by Jake. I examined his palms. His fingers moved over each screw with surety, firm and practiced. He stated, "It appears that one of these joints is loose," his voice remaining subdued. I averted my gaze. Therefore, it is possible that it would have fallen off if it had not been repaired yesterday. Jake's gaze briefly shifted to me before he nodded. Potentially. Nevertheless, everything is all right at this time. I experienced a chill down my spine. I was uncertain as to whether the issue was caused by Jake's presence or the malfunctioning fan. However, this time we engaged in more conversation as he worked on the repair. The subject of the conversation was not exclusively the fan. It was a discussion of life, including other topics. Regarding trivial matters that I had initially hesitated to disclose to an unfamiliar individual, I discussed the possibility of relocating to Phoenix following my marriage to Mark. I neglected to disclose that I believed that marriage would alleviate my feelings of isolation. Additionally, Jake declined to inquire. He discussed the locations where he had worked and the luxurious homes that he had renovated, but had never considered residing in. I detected a gentle sense of humor in his intonation, a kind of candor that elicited a sense of relaxation in me. It had been an extended period since I had engaged in a conversation that was so effortless. At that point, I came to another realization as Jake completed his task. I was opposed to his departure. Jake gathered his tools and then he stood up to brush off his hands. He gazed at me and stated, "Everything is in order at this time." I bit my jawbone. "I appreciate it. Not only for the restorations, but also for your time." Jake's head tilted slightly, as if he were contemplating my remarks. However, rather than immediately responding, he simply smirked. At any given moment, I escorted him to the door, and when it closed behind him, I stood there for an extended period, feeling more bewildered than ever. I was unable to suppress the sensation that was brewing within me any longer. It was not merely benevolence. It was something that was more forbidden and more perilous. As I sat by the window enjoying my tea that evening, I contemplated the profound influence that a simple visit could have. And then my phone rang. Jake sent a text message. "I trust that the fan is functioning properly. Please inform me if you require any additional information." Simple lettering. However, my heart rate increased as I lifted it. My fingers hesitated on the keyboard. I could have responded by stating that everything is satisfactory. I could have set the phone down and completely disregarded it. However, I responded via text message. "Everything is satisfactory. Jake, I am grateful once more." And this time, as I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but contemplate whether I had anticipated something more. The uneasiness persisted despite my decision to put down the phone. What was the reason for my emotions? I am a fan repairman, that is all. A courteous message. A casual encounter. However, I was aware that it was untrue. I reclined on the sofa and gazed upwards at the ceiling. The fan continued to rotate. There are no unusual sounds. Everything was satisfactory. With the exception of myself. I bit my lip, my fingertips tapping an unconscious rhythm on the armrest. I had conducted myself appropriately. I had not committed any infractions. However, I was aware that my actions were not the source of my distress. It was the sensation that was gradually becoming more apparent to me. I appreciated the manner in which Jake regarded me, not in the manner in which Mark regarded me. Alternatively, they did not gaze at me. I occasionally question whether Mark even recognizes me as a distinct individual or merely a familiar aspect of his life, as his involvement in our marriage has become so negligible. Jake is distinctive. He regarded me as if I were a genuine individual, a woman who is worthy of consideration. I attempted to dismiss the notion by closing my eyes. However, the more I endeavored to evade it, the more it adhered to me like a sweet but perilous temptation. After that, my phone rung once more as if by a cruel twist of fate. Jake, I have the impression that you are still concerned about the fan. If you desire, I can verify the information once more. My heart was thundering in my chest as I held my breath. False. I was unable to accomplish that. I would be opening a door that I was uncertain I could control if I responded positively. I gazed at the screen as I slid my finger across it. I was in conflict with myself at the time of the message. Then I began to compose. There is no necessity. I believe it is very excellent this time. But I appreciate it. Before I could reconsider my decision, I pressed the send button. However, a minor sense of disappointment overtook me immediately upon the message's transmission. Because I was aware that a part of me wished to say, "Come over." I placed the phone down, experiencing an unusual sensation. Solace? Regret? I was uncertain. I endeavored to convince myself that I had made the correct decision. I had declined. I had maintained my distance. I had not committed any infractions. However, I continued to gaze at the screen, anticipating. What are you anticipating? Is there another communication from Jake? Perhaps a suggestion that he was visiting without my requesting it? Is there an indicator that I am not the only one who has noticed the simmering tension between us? Nothing. I chuckled to myself, feeling foolish. What had I anticipated? I rose from my bed, entered the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of wine. I typically refrain from consuming alcohol in the evening. However, today, I felt the need to consume something to alleviate my anxiety. The faint light caused the wine glass to ripple. I silently gazed out the window as I leaned against the kitchen counter. The arid heat was still intense in Phoenix at night, but the darkness of the sky served to mitigate its intensity. I reflected on the time when Mark and I first relocated to this location. I believed it would serve as a fresh start. An existence that is consistent. A family that is content. Standing alone with a glass of wine in my hand, I never thought I would experience a night like this, as I grappled with my emotions toward another man. The draperies by the window were rustled by a gentle breeze. I closed my eyes and exhaled deeply. Afterward, the telephone called once more. I was stunned to the point that I nearly dropped the glass of wine. When I reached for the phone to unlock the screen, my hand trembled slightly. Jake. Emily, good night. When you require any assistance, I am available to assist you. Right here. My pulse was pounding. It was a simplistic text. There is nothing that is particularly abnormal or incorrect. However, there was something peculiar about the manner in which he articulated it. Unspoken invitation. A pledge that remains unspoken. I felt my chest constrict as I bit my lip. I should not have responded. I should have set down the phone, turned off the lights, and retired to bed. Instead, my fingertips glided across the keyboard without awareness. Thank you, Jake. Greetings. I selected the send option. I was aware that I was inching closer to the brink of peril as soon as the text was transmitted. Standing there for an extended period, I observed the ceiling fan as it rotated steadily across the ceiling. The room was cooler, but a new flame had been ignited within me, and I was uncertain if I wanted to extinguish it. Like what you heard. There's plenty more heartbreak and secrets to come. Hit like, subscribe, and stay curious with Tangled Truths.